Hi everyone, I'm Maria McLachlan. In the first part of this series, I explained the background to my decision to report someone to the police. Welcome to part 2. There were several candidates I could have chosen to report, but one individual made it very easy for me, not only by using his real name on Twitter and living in England, but by sinking lower than had any of the others, by tweeting about me falsehoods that were more despicable than any I had seen previously. Blatant lies that were the total opposite of everything that I have stood for my entire life. I genuinely felt that if anyone was hateful and deranged enough to believe them, and I know some people do, they could well be hateful and deranged enough to physically attack me, my home, or hurt any of my loved ones. I also want to say that I have never lied about anyone or anything in connection with the assault on me in 2017. I have repeatedly been called a liar, but there is not one scrap of evidence that I have ever done so, and a mountain of evidence that everything I have said is the truth. At the beginning of 2020, I made a video about the assault on me at Speaker's Corner and the trans activist response, which showed how the same individual had circulated a false narrative about what happened to me when I was attacked by those 3 men. The video is still right here on YouTube. It's entitled Assault on Maria McLachlan at Speaker's Corner and How Trans Activists Responded. If there is one thing that has destroyed my faith in humanity more than anything else, it is that ordinary people will quite shamelessly lie, in spite of the evidence that contradicts their lies, if they think it will help their agenda. There are people who think nothing of trying to destroy the reputation, the career, the health of someone who has done nothing to them, but whom they see as a political enemy. Of course, I'm not just talking about myself here. I know of countless people who've been targeted with the irrational hatred of those I make no apology for calling a cult. I'm not claiming that what I've endured is as bad as what women I mentioned in part 1 have endured at the hands of the police, and I should add Kelly J. Keane to that list. I'm certainly not claiming that the bullying of me is anywhere close to what's been happening to certain journalists, including Julie Bindel, or academics like Kathleen Stock and Joe Phoenix. I know that there are many more victims of the dreadful abuse and defamation by these cultists who aren't as well known, who don't have the love and emotional support that some of us have, and who live in fear of their livelihoods and more. In my case, their continued defamation of me and their attempts to shut me up has had largely the opposite effect to that which they apparently intended. It has galvanised me into being far more active than I had ever expected to be, and it has won me far more support than if they had just behaved decently and honestly in the first place. It is for everyone being victimised by the cultists and being failed by the police, by politicians, by employers, by their trade unions, that I will continue to call out the cultists and expose the failings as I come across them. I'm not going to name the individual I reported in these videos, but having seen him sink so low, I did a search of his tweets and I was staggered. If we include his own retweets of his own lies, there were well over 300 tweets about me in the 3 years since he's first started lying about me. This felt like a serious and terrifying obsession. I don't recall tweeting about this bloke. I may have done. I had challenged him directly on Twitter in the early months after the assault, and I mentioned him in several blog posts I wrote because of the lies he told and the vile things he said about me and others, and I posted the screenshots of his tweets. Why shouldn't I? But what I never did was lie about him. I didn't need to. The proof of the abuse was in his tweets. So I collected screenshots of a large number of his tweets, not all by any means, and I have made those that I collected available on my website. As I said in part one, my anger and distress doesn't come from being insulted. It comes from being lied about in a way intended to stir up hatred against me. Having said that, I do want to draw attention to some of his insults for what they reveal about him, as well as what they tell us about Twitter's double standards. First, a general one in which he gives his opinion of women and our male allies with whom he disagrees. I'm not even going to read it out. What I would ask you to do is consider whether you have ever seen or heard anything remotely like this said about anyone else by me, by Kelly J. Keane, by Venice Allen, Graham Linehan, Megan Murphy, Karen Davis, or any one of countless others who challenge gender ideology and who've been permanently banned from Twitter. Of course you haven't. I've never said or even thought anything like this about anyone in my entire life. And the responses were in the same vein. That is the gender cult. I'm now going to show you one directed at Caroline Farrow. Again, I'm not reading it out. I mentioned this in a blog post I wrote once, saying it was the most disgusting tweet I'd ever seen, which it was at that time. The author eventually responded on Twitter to me by saying it goes double for me. How sweet. Note that the man with hundreds of tweets about me accuses me of being obsessed with him. This reminds me of a rather entertaining self-own of his I came across, in which he shows a screenshot he grabbed from either, well, it's obviously YouTube, probably from below one of my videos, in which I am addressing one of my oldest real-life friends as Babe. He says, I never talk like this. How the hell would he know what I talk like unless he tries to read or listen to every word I say anywhere? I use the word babe a lot in real life, but only to people I'm very close to. I don't use it sarcastically against my political enemies of the other sex, as he does, which is presumably why he's called creepy. But imagine the ego to think I might have picked it up from him. Now that we've set the tone, let's look at a few of the insults that he's come up with just for me. In the first part, I mentioned that I was quoted in The Sun saying people should be free to insult each other. He's called me Rose West a few times. For those who don't know, she's an incarcerated torturer and serial killer of young women, including her own daughter. Most of her crimes were committed in partnership with her husband, Fred West, who committed suicide in prison. Here we go. I'm a Poundland Rose West. And here he brings my husband into it. Here I'm called a blatantly obvious weirdo, crank with serious issues. No irony there at all. Here I am a swivel-eyed loon. Here he suggests I'm someone who has violent fantasies and wants to enact them. I get quite a lot of this sort of thing from the cult, and it stems from the fact that when 3 members of their cult physically attacked me for no good reason, I fought back. I fought back in 3 ways. At the time, I tried to stop the one who'd smashed my camera from running away by holding on to him. Secondly, I immediately reported the attack to the police and went to court. Thirdly, I mocked the ridiculous false narrative started by this individual, and since then I devoted much of my time exposing the hate of the gender nuts and challenging their ideology through my website and more recently through this YouTube channel. They cannot stand the fact they haven't managed to shut me up. They cannot stand women who are not only actual women, but stronger and braver and smarter than they are. That is what this is all about. I'll just show one more. He calls me dopey, hypocritical, hate-addled, batshit, twat-spangled, fuck-nuggeted, gobshite, Rose West wannabe. Now, I am many things, but I am not a wannabe torturer and serial killer, and I am not hypocritical. I'll say it again, I'm not bothered by insults, especially from those who are so obviously morally and cerebrally inferior. So what am I bothered about? Apart from the rank stupidity of people like this guy, fabrication, sheer invention for the purpose of justifying violence against me or anyone else, and for the purpose of stirring up hate and possibly instigating more violence. The first lie that I know of that this person tweeted about me was at 6:51 a.m. on 14 September 2017. In other words, early in the morning on the day after I was assaulted. He says I'd been on a Facebook page all day long on the day before the assault, giving out vile abuse. Now, if he'd only said this once, I wouldn't be bothering with it, but he repeated it 9 times that first day, and he even claimed to have evidence to back up what he said about me, but of course he didn't produce it because it wasn't true. He was so desperate to get people believing his narrative. Let me tell you about that Facebook conversation. A group called Action for Trans Health London was trying to get a meeting I planned to go to shut down. The meeting was about proposed changes to the law in favour of gender self-ID, and it was to be my first meeting on anything to do with transgender issues. I didn't understand why some people wanted to stop it happening rather than coming to the meeting and arguing. I mean, if they had decent arguments, they would have won over hearts and minds, right? I knew very little about gender ideology back then and what the conflicts were about, but I was really disgusted at these people trying to get a meeting closed down. Of course, we're all used to it now, trying to bully, intimidate and shut people up rather than trying to defeat us with arguments has become the norm. So I went to this group's Facebook page and I saw a post by Claire Solomon that seemed eminently sensible to me. I gave it a like and I read the first few responses, which were typically nasty and ridiculous and calling feminists transphobes and accusing them of making trans people unsafe. I felt pretty angry that they were trying to get the meeting shut down, and I joined in the conversation. While that conversation, or silly squabble would be a better way of putting it, while it was going on, they got news that the venues had cancelled the meeting that I wanted to go to, and they started posting celebratory posts which made me angrier. I called them bullies. I called one of them a handmaid, which was wrong because he turned out to be a trans-identifying man. I think most of the idiots on that thread were men posing as women. Then suddenly this guy appears and calls me a raging turf, imbecile, prejudice, muddy thinking, whining like a spoilt baby, a moron. This was his first comment on the thread, and it was by far the most abusive comment that was said by anyone on that thread. This was one of my very first online exchanges with gender nutters, and I was quite shocked by how hateful and nasty he was. So I took screenshots of the entire conversation, never dreaming at the time that I would need to use them to disprove his defamation of me. So he tweeted that same lie that I'd been giving out vile abuse all day, 9 times on the first day after I was assaulted, and several more times over the next 10 days or so before I finally wrote a blog post giving my account of what happened to me and linking to my screenshot of the entire conversation he'd been lying about. My intervention amounted to fewer than 10 tweets in under 2 hours. The screenshot can still be viewed on my website. Anyway, that wasn't the worst thing, obviously. The worst thing was that also on the morning after I was assaulted, this person had taken from one or more available videos showing the assault on me some 25 carefully selected stills and had deliberately omitted the most important one, which was Tara Wolf running out and attacking me while I was standing 2 or 3 meters away from the group of people harassing us, and I was filming them. This guy had added an entirely fabricated narrative of his own, which placed me as the instigator. I'm not going to go into that succession of tweets in any detail now because I did that in my videos about the assault, both the long video and the abridged version. And again, not satisfied with posting this work of fiction just the once, he actually retweeted the whole thing 6 times. He retweeted it even after the court case, which the only one of my 3 assailants who was caught and charged was convicted of assaulting me. And just in case you think he confined himself to the pack of lies in that Twitter thread, not at all. Still, on the first day after the assault, he was making ridiculous and unsupportable claims like this. This guy must have spent hours posting lies that were deliberately intended to hurt me, hurt my reputation. And for what? What exactly was his purpose? Was it to make me so angry that I would stop living my normal life and start fighting back by getting involved in campaigning, building a website, creating a YouTube channel, etc.? I don't think so. It was a victim-blaming narrative to justify the attack on me, and that is why the cultists picked it up and ran with it. A couple more things before I finish this part. I was mystified by this. Private photos? I had to go and look at every mention I'd made of him on my site because I honestly couldn't remember posting any photos of his gob on my site. But actually I had. It's one graphic with 2 images. I'm obscuring them because apparently these photos of himself, which can only have been put online once upon a time by himself, upset him. And I can't imagine why, seeing as in at least one, which is clearly pre-transition, he just looks like an ordinary bloke and not like a pantomime Dane. I can't remember where I found this creation, but the reason I grabbed it and uploaded it into my site is because of what it said at the bottom. Yes, he did that. And yet he thinks I'm guilty of some kind of heinous criminal act because I stuck a couple of pics that were already in the public domain. As he says, he put them on the web himself, and I put them on some obscure page of my website. Furthermore, he was incomprehensibly proud of the fact that his partner, the mother of his children, is apparently a wannabe violent thug too. Having said all that, in my judgment, none of the tweets that I have shown so far, even though they were far worse than anything complained about from Kate Scotto, Marion Miller or Kerry Black, merited a complaint to the police. What did merit the complaint I made? I'll show you in part 3. Bye for now.